Hattie McDaniel's win as Mammy in Gone with the Wind in 1940 changed the cinematic landscape, allowing for black stars alike to have hope for a better future, opening doors to the possibility and probability of black people being seen as more than just domestic workers. While she mainly gave us comedic genius in scenes like this
Scrumptious piece of jewelry?
Yeah, where'd you get it?
Just give it to me.
Hattie was also dynamic in her skill of being able to convey emotions deeply in dramatic
Can't help
scenes
it.
like
He
this.
sent me something too. Mr. Hilton never forgot me, even when he's fighting them devils.
To win such an award during a time where racism and segregation were running rampant, it is astonishing how Hattie rose from just a poor country girl who dropped out of school to pursue a career that had no guaranteed path to become the first black woman to win for Best Supporting Actress. So today on the first episode of On the Mark, we're going to discuss Hattie McDaniel's legacy, career, how her career changed Hollywood, and the lasting effects that her win left on the Motion Picture Academy long after her death. So strap in, relax, get your snacks if you need them, as we dive into the history and the astonishing career of Hattie McDaniel. Hello. Well, I'm back. It's been a long time, I know. And yes, I know I have a new haircut. Well, not so much on the cut. Some of you might be asking, where have you been? And some of you might not be asking that at all, which is fair. And let me reintroduce myself. My name is Marque, and today we're going to be talking about Hattie McDaniel in this new episode of a series that I call On the Mark. I know it's supposed to be On the Marquee. I was missing an E, and that's how ideas happen. Instead of On the Marquee, it's On the Mark. Thank you to Felicia Wheeler for that. So it's been a while since I've posted anything, a while since I've done any content creation, but I found something that makes me very happy and passionate about what I'm doing. And I think this is a chance for me to do something new. So I hope you all like the video. I hope you all enjoy what I do. And if you do, please subscribe, like, and comment what you think. And if you want to continue to see my videos and you want to keep up with them, make sure you hit that subscribe button again. Make sure you hit that bell so that way you get notified whenever I post anything. But okay, I've taken up enough of your time already. Let's get into the work that I just did. To understand why her story is so important, we got to start from the beginning. Hattie McDaniel was born in Wichita, Kansas in 1893 to a gospel singing mother, Susan Holbert, and her father, a Civil War veteran, Henry McDaniel. For one, we must acknowledge that she was born only 28 years after a war that effectively ended slavery and set African Americans free, meaning that she was able to see what freedom looked like for African Americans after that war and what that so-called freedom provided. Her family lived in Wichita for a few more years until they moved to Fort Collins in 1901. There, her father began to preach and sing in church, which became one of her early influences on her as a child, which influenced her to sing as well. With Hattie herself stating in 1947, "I knew that I could sing and dance. My mother would give me a nickel sometimes to stop." Aside from her singing and dancing talents, she also was excelling in her dramatic talents as well, at one point receiving a gold medal for her recital of Convict Joe, a story about the evils of alcoholism during the Prohibition era. After a while of her father looking for work, he decided to start a traveling minstrel show with his son Sam and his other son Otis. Minstrel shows were prominently racist events that presented harmful and hateful stereotypes and caricatures of black people. From blackface and Aunt Jemima to illustrations of mammies and pickaninnies, racism in entertainment ran deeply in the industry. This racism would be a continuous challenge she would have to face for most of her career, but that we'll get into later in the episode. So once her father started the traveling minstrel show, she decided during her sophomore year she was going to drop out and pursue her career full time, which eventually led to her forming a group with her sister Etta called the McDaniel Sisters. And the group was a smash hit. So this will be just the beginning of Hattie's illustrious career. However, we don't live in a perfect world, so in 1916 her brother Otis dies of pneumonia, which effectively ends her traveling with the minstrel show. And she did go into different ventures and look for different opportunities, which ended up having her be featured in Melody Hounds, a black touring ensemble, which she did pretty good in. That was until 1929, and then the stock market crashed. The crash led to 50% of black Americans in America being unemployed, compared to the 15% of white Americans in America that were also affected by the stock market crash. Which again, no one's surprised by those numbers. However, this only made Hattie look for a job, and she ended up getting one in Sam Pink's Club Madrid, which after a short while, she became a regular performer. However, after 2 years of performing in Sam's Club, she decides to move out west to Los Angeles with her sister and her brother, Etta or Lena and Sam. Now, because she wasn't making any money at this this time, she decided to take on 2 jobs. The only job she could get at the time, however, was a maid in a laundress, like everyone else, which is sad, but it's true. But she had to get those 2 jobs to make ends meet. But then luck would show its face again because her brother Sam was working on a radio show called The Optimistic Donut Hour, which eventually he was able to get Hattie a job on. So Sam got Hattie a part on the radio, and her character's name was Hi-Hat Hattie. Now, this would become her first role on radio, and her first role on radio was a maid. And Hi-Hat Hattie was characterized as a bossy maid who sometimes forgot her place, which I would love to know what that exactly means, but as I digress. So she took on the role and she did a really good job, and it became a success. However, the success of the show was not matching the success of that paycheck, so she had to continue to work as a maid in the laundress. Luck would strike itself again. Soon enough, she would be in films, and eventually she would get the big break of her life. So finally, in 1932, Hattie gets her chance to make her screen debut. She stars in The Golden West, which is a story about a pioneer family and their journey to the frontier, and it shows us throughout multiple generations of the family in the film. Hattie, of course, plays the Mammy, which we're starting to see a very common trend here. But before we continue, we must understand what the Mammy character represents. The Mammy stereotype is and was an offensive caricature of black women that originated during the antebellum era, popularized in minstrel shows. Here they go again. Her characters were meant to be loyal and unattractive. That way, white people would feel safe from sexual violence, even though the black women were still being sexually violated. Now, though these roles that she were taking as mammies were demeaning, it did show off her talent as a comedic actress as well as a dramatic actress, which allowed her to be put under contract with Fox for $150 a week, which is good money at that time. Upon signing this contract, she signed on to do 2 films, Judge Priest and The Little Colonel, which both became box office hits, which allowed her to join the Screen Actors Guild. By her signing up, she became the first black woman to do so, as well as giving her the opportunity to have more screen credits as well as the choice of better opportunities. But she always ended up in mammy roles, so they really played. Soon after, she began getting minor roles, but then those minor roles turned into major roles. Some of those major roles were China Seeds, where she starred with Jean Harlow and Clark Gable for the very first time, as well as Vivacious Lady with James Stewart and Ginger Rogers. This success got her a new contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer for $700 a week, making 2 films. She started to befriend her white co-stars such as Joan Crawford, Betty Davis, Shirley Temple, and of course Clark Gable. But what Hattie didn't know was, behind the scenes, something was coming together that was going to change her life in cinematic history. David O. Selznick bought the rights to Gone with the Wind, a best-selling book at the time, for $50,000, the largest amount of money anyone has spent for a book adaptation in a long time. Now, most of us cinephiles know the pretty much basic topics of the book and the film, but if you don't, I'll just give you a quick debrief. The story follows Scarlett O'Hara as she battles lost love, the Civil War, the collapse of the Confederation, the end of the war, and the subsequent reconstruction afterwards. Sounds fun, right? At this time in 1936, Hattie was under contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. However, she was very familiar with the book, so she became interested. And then, of course, not too long after, the race to find Mammy began. Most of us who are familiar with the film know about the whole Scarlett O'Hara race, but a lot of us do not know that the same race was happening for Mammy. Now, Mammy would be known as the head woman of the house, being owned by O'Hara's mother, and then before her, O'Hara's grandmother as well. And to think she was considered somebody's property? She's characterized after Mrs. O'Hara, who is very religious and cares about modesty. However, she does look down on the field slaves because she's a house slave. Like, are you serious? But this role was a very huge part for black actresses at the time, seeing as how this was one of the biggest movies and biggest films of that year. While the film did allow these black actresses to have better opportunities, it still was met with controversy and backlash. The NAACP condemned the roles of black characters in the film, while protesting the film, stating that it romanticized images of slavery and black stereotypes. They also urged for script changes, such as scenes where there's abuse to the black people in the film, as well as a lot of the word, you know what, being used. And thank God for that, because the script changes were done and the film went on. However, the role of Mammy had still not been casted yet. Clark Gable, one of her closest friends and previous castmates, heavily recommended and campaigned for Hattie to play the part of Mammy. By using his popularity, he pushed the studio to cast her. Reluctantly, Hattie did go and audition, dressed up in her authentic uniform as a maid, and she was offered the part. Principal photography on the film started in January of 1939, and let's just say her time on set was Well, for one, due to Jim Crow laws, she wasn't able to use the same facilities as her white cast members. But again, Clark Gable campaigned for her to be able to use the same facilities, and she was able to. And that's how you use your platform, people. She did start to befriend her co-stars, Olivia de Havilland, who was also nominated for Best Supporting Actress in 1940, as well as Vivian Leigh and other people on set. And at this time, she was making $1,000 every week, which in today's time is $23,000 a week. So Sister was making good money. The premiere of the film was planned to be held in Atlanta in the Lowe's Grand Theater. However, segregation laws banned Hattie McDaniel from attending. Clark Gable was enraged by this and decided he was not going to attend. However, McDaniel convinced him to go, and he did, reluctantly. However, she didn't just have to deal with white people, but also the black community as well. The NAACP criticized her as well for playing another Mammy role and perpetuating black stereotypes that were harmful to them. To which she responded in quote, "I'd rather make $700 a week playing a maid than $7 a week being a maid."
I know that's right.
After getting amazing reviews in the film, something happened to Hattie that she was not expecting. On February 11th, 1940, nominations for Best Supporting Actress came out, and amongst the names on the list, Hattie's was there. Upon finding out, she was deeply moved and honored. A few weeks later, on February 29th, 1940, the Academy Awards was held at the Coconut Grove restaurant in the Ambassador Hotel. However, due to segregation laws, Hattie was not able to get into the room. However, David O. Selznick pulled a favor to get her into the room, but this did not help because she had to end up sitting in the back of the room with her white agent. Like, she's literally a nominee for an award. But okay. After being able to enter the room, her category was called Best Supporting Actress. And to Hattie's surprise, her name came up and she won. The room fell silent, and this triumphant roar of applause came up right after. She took to the stage and gave one of Oscar history's best speeches ever. Hattie described this moment herself. "This was too big a moment for my personal backslapping. I wanted this occasion to prove an inspiration to Negro youth for many years to come." So after this win, you would think that she'd be getting a lot more roles and be getting better opportunities. However, you would be dead wrong. Hattie continued to work as maids, servants, and even more mammies. And this was in part due to rigid casting. But now that she's won Hollywood's most coveted award, what does that mean for her looking forward, and what does that mean for her future? So you would think that after her iconic win, you would think she would get more roles and better roles at that, but they said absolutely not. Eventually, roles on television did dry up, and so she turned her hand and worked towards activism, working closely with the NAACP to focus on the injustice of black people as well as the ill will against black people. But then she turned her focus back to television and radio, becoming the first black woman to star in her very own show, The Beulah Show, of course playing a domestic worker. However, she was very funny, clever, and witty in this show, and she got rave reviews and also received the highest pay that she had ever received, $2,200 per week. She starred on the show from 1950 to 1952. However, in 1951, she suffered a stroke, and then in 1952, unable to work, she left the show entirely and was replaced by Louise Beavers. And then not too long after, on October 26, 1952, Hattie McDaniel passed away from complications of breast cancer. She ended her career off after having 40 years in the business and breaking down barriers for black actors, actresses, and people alike. She did her job and she did it well. But if you want to know the reason why her story is so important and why we must remember it to this day, is that Hattie McDaniel not only broke down barriers, but gave black artists like Taraji P. Henson, Angela Bassett, and so many others the opportunity to do what we love, which is to act, create, and show real emotion on screen. And the doors that she opened for them continue to be open for other black artists and actresses alike. So I do thank you for your time. I thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time on the next episode of On the Mark.